Harshita. Anyway, so since the likelihood of my lasting an hour is not a possibility, like I told you, I woke up with a terrible killer back pain, and I took some sedatives and painkillers and went off to sleep. And I was woken up by this great university, since the work that I was doing for them is confidential. I cannot tell you which university this is. And to sit and scan candidates and see how they are. And they're all liars. So I said, why are we even going through this charade? You should hand them over to the police if they have created false documents. And they said, no, 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 you go, you're not feeling well. So I said, okay. All right. So we'll come back to where we were yesterday. We had reached the point where we were talking about empiricism. And I was trying to tell you that empiricism did not meet with the spectacular failure that positivism did. Okay, and one reason why that happened was that empiricism is something which came into being from Germany. I told you it's usually associated with the names of Mark and Avenarius. And Mark and Avenarius were two people who basically uh, didn't want to make the mistakes that the positivists were making. Now, if you look at the positivists, they were emphasizing upon verification and establishing the truth of a fact which did not involve a value in any way. But you'll find that empiricists didn't commit this mistake. In fact, they don't talk about any kind of verification openly, that there is a component of verification even in empiricism. But they didn't speak about it openly. And they concentrated their attention of research on metrics, not matrix, which the Americans pronounce matrix. I'm talking about metrics, numbers, metrics. Okay, metrics. They took refuge in metrics. But if you want to understand how is it that the empiricists arrived at this particular strategy, which somehow the positivists missed, then you'll have to understand that everything of the success of empiricism, and you cannot say that empiricism is not successful. Positivism, logical positivism, all of them failed. But empiricism really didn't fail at all. Okay, and you will nowadays see this uh, funny combination of theory and empiricism, which is called empirical theory. Now, this is something I'll talk to you about later, more towards the end of this. Uh, but what do we talk when we talk about uh, empiricism? What subjects do we choose? How do we basically estimate those subjects? That is all we need to know. Now, very briefly, which will be for about 3 seconds, let me remind you once again of behavioralism is based in empiricism, but the drawbacks are not necessarily drawbacks of empiricism. I'll come to that anyway. We have to talk about David Easton. We have to talk about behaviorism, behavioralism. Then we have to talk about post-behavioralism. So that we are going to enter into that vast uh, tunnel. And while they are very similar, uh, but the causes for the failure of behavioralism have not got much to do with empiricism. Okay, so to get back to, I was just saying that I will quickly run you in 3 seconds uh, through one particular conception. I told you of the conception of the active mind, which is something that got a complete boost during Plato's times, where he said all knowledge is inborn. It's not outside of you, it's inside of you. That is what Plato said. So if you have to investigate reality, you have to think internally, not about objects externally, because objects externally are not construed adequately and they are anyway in need of repair. So this was a very long this thing kind of a philosophy had a pretty long innings, especially like I said yesterday, thanks to the Christians. But you find that by the time empiricism comes, okay, we've had two interventions. One which is Aristotle. Aristotle, if you read his work, prior and posterior analytics, that is where you'll get the first glimpse of what empiricism is. And of course, so you have to read Aristotle for that. Apart from Aristotle, the other influence, the other much bigger influence on the emergence of this empirical knowledge should be placed at the doorstep of John Locke. Now, every political science teacher talks to you about John Locke, um, talks about the social contract. And they probably do it in all possibly wrong ways. So let's try to understand who John Locke is and why is he so important to us when we are studying empiricism. Now, I made a mention of John Locke several times in the past, but not in this particular context. Now, John Locke is not just a social contractualist. He's not just a political thinker. John Locke is the world's first political economist. Okay, and John Locke is also the reason why the complete change that I talked to you yesterday about the perception of the world, which is a movement from reality being the same for everyone, and also that common good existed. So if you pursued common good, then you were pursuing even the personal good. And that is to be found in Aristotle. What is good for uh, the community is good for the people. So you're imagining the people, the society at first, and then you're imagining members of that particular society. But this changed with individualism, where you will say that uh, if there is no individual, how will you have a society? How will you have a society if you have no individualism? Just imagine a world without anyone. Can it have a society? It cannot. It needs various individuals in various species, not necessarily only in the human species, for some kind of social structures emerging in different animal societies. Okay, so what um, John Locke says is first get rid of the idea that you are born with knowledge, that everything that you need to know is in your brain at the time of birth. Please get rid of that. He said, when you're born, the mind is tabula rasa. I told you this also. We had a discussion on this. Tabula rasa, empty tablet. Okay, because the ancient world didn't have paper. So an empty tablet of stone. Okay, so you had an empty tablet of stone, which is your mind when you're born. There's nothing in it. You're born not knowing anything at all. You don't know the smallest thing about life. So then how do you get knowledge? The two things that are there in the mind which allow you to attain knowledge are sense perception and cognition. These are the two things you'll find uh, in the mind. So, unless you see, unless you touch, unless you smell, you don't get to know anything about anything. Okay? If you want to know that there is something called hot, and usually a frying pan is hot, unless you've had some kind of an experience with it, just you may have gone near to it and experienced the heat that is coming out of the frying pan. Okay? So, unless you experience that, you don't know what heat is. And you wouldn't know the different kinds of heat. If you're in India, in Hyderabad, we have 12 months of summer, then you begin to understand that there is a certain kind of heat that comes from the autograph, from the sun, and that can scorch you. That can completely scorch you. So you will say one of the sources of heat is the sun. The other source of heat, you will say, is fire. Depending upon the time in which you are, fire could be something that you burnt wood and generated, or it could be coal if you were in England. So you know that these things generate heat. And you also know through experience, that if you cook your food, then it tastes better. If you eat raw food, then it has no taste, or it has some taste which I am sure will be very yucky to human beings. But once you understand that fire and heat can be used in order to cook, you start cooking. But how do you start cooking first? You start cooking on stone. Okay, you light a fire under a stone. You wait for the stone to heat up, and then you start cooking things on it. In case you don't believe me, there are certain Neanderthal people in Hyderabad, and we have a dish called Pathar ka gosht. Okay, so you cook meat on a stone. It's considered to be a delicacy. I don't know why. And it seems to be becoming a rarity. I don't hear much more about this thing these days. So that is how it started. But as civilization progressed, uh, you had the metal age, and in the first metal age, it was iron. Iron was the metal. People realized that iron lent itself to be made hot or cold. So they started using iron. So iron is the medium through which you now start cooking. And you also understand that everybody doesn't live in Hyderabad and therefore has 24 hours of uh, sunlight and 24/7, 365 days. That doesn't hold true everywhere. So when you go to some countries, it is cold. So when it is cold, you realize that you can burn a fire, and with the fire, you can keep yourself warm. Okay? Now, in John Locke's scheme of things, whatever you're learning here is going to your head through the medium of your senses. How do you know something is hot? You can feel heat. If something is very hot, you know that if I put my hand on a pan which is on a stove, then my hand will be stuck there. We know that. Okay. Maybe a couple of people actually got their hands stuck somewhere. Apart from that, you will also see that we tend to realize other forms of protection from uh, cold. So, how do you protect yourself from cold? The most primitive man, he knew of the fire anyway, but that wasn't enough. So, to make himself warmer, he got himself a. People went hunting. They were hunter gatherers. And when they came, they didn't eat the skin. They skinned the animal and cooked it. But the skin was around. So they used the skin as primitive clothing. So primitive clothing is something that comes into being. And you can see that it is like this, that there is an evolutionary process taking place from where humanity was at one time to where it had reached by John Locke's time. Okay? And what John Locke is basically trying to do is trying to tell us the the whole idea of understanding that we are getting civilized is something that comes into our head through cognition. So, if it is sense perception that gives inputs into your body through your senses, and all uh, inputs ultimately reach the brain. They ultimately reach the brain, and you can ask yourself a question. If all these inputs reach the brain, then how does the brain distinguish between each of them? Okay, I mean, just understand that I send you randomly into a room full of books, not even kept in any order, and say search for whatever you want. You won't even know where to start searching, right? So, similarly, if so much information is going to the human brain all the time, then how is it that the human brain is able to separate one kind of information from another kind of information? And how is it allowing you to form a clear understanding of these sense perceptions. So for that, the quality that the brain has is cognition. Okay? If you understand the word recognition, then you'll understand cognition quite well. What is recognition? Recognition, which means some part of your cognition which wasn't working, and therefore you forgot about that, made sure that you didn't know about that bit. So, recognition, if another attempt is made by the brain, not consciously by you, then you'll probably understand it. Okay, that is why it is recognition. All right, so cognition is that ability to separate, categorize the various sense perceptions that are going into our head. So what does this process lead to? It leads to the process of understanding. It leads to the process of understanding. And therefore, John Locke titled his essay, An Essay Concerning Human Understanding. A very, very unassuming title. Something in which he's not saying anything terribly complicated. That's how it seems. Understand? We all know what is understanding. So what is Locke trying to do? What Locke is trying to do is put in front of you his idea of the process of knowledge acquisition through the medium and only through the medium of senses and cognition. So that is what you will find in an essay concerning human understanding, which is that the world is not in your brain. You're not born with innate knowledge. You are born with nothing in your brain, and it is through your interaction with your surroundings, with your the objects around you. It is through that you will start getting an idea of what the world is. Okay. I mean, just think of one thing. Somebody is newly born. Nobody speaks any language around him. They only feed him whatever he has to be fed, and then again left alone. Let's say this child grows up into a 10-year-old child in one particular room. That one particular room is his world. Now, if you bring him out of that room, he'll be petrified. He'll be completely petrified because he has not seen this world. Because he has not seen this world. So suddenly you're showing him something, and suddenly, mind you, because he's grown up now, He's no longer a baby. Suddenly you're showing him something which he cannot make sense of. He cannot make sense of trees. He cannot make sense of breeze. He cannot make sense of various odors. He can't. So, what is this boy? A living dead body. Living because there's life in him, but he's practically dead because he doesn't know about anything. He can't make sense of the world. And like Tarzan Bandilo, he didn't have apes and all of them to pick him up and teach him English so that when Jane comes, Tarzan is ready to converse in English. So all those things didn't happen to this chap. They didn't happen to this chap, so he's petrified. So this is what Locke argues. He's basically saying that it is the contact with the outside world that makes you knowledgeable. So why are we calling it outside world? Which means we are jettisoning the idea that we are born with any kind of knowledge. We're jettisoning that idea. We are now saying that it is only through our senses, sense perception, and cognition that we start gradually understanding more and more of the world. More and more of the things that you have already been introduced to. There is no thing that it won't go beyond that. So when it goes beyond something, then you understand, oh, this also can be done. So in his essay concerning human understanding, Locke rejects the theories that say that knowledge is inborn, that at the time of birth, the brain is not empty. Very much to the contrary, for Locke, the brain is empty, but it has the body. And this body is the conduit to the brain. It's a conduit to the brain for various senses, perceptions, cognitions to go through to the brain and have clear knowledge. So now if you talk about proof, there is proof. Can you basically say in a right angle triangle, the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the square on the sum of the other two sides? Can you say that? You can't. You cannot. Okay? So why can't we? Because now we've moved away from deductive reasoning. If you say that everything is in your head at the time of birth, then everything that you know is something that you deduce from what you already know. Whereas if you follow what Locke is saying, Locke is talking about induction, pressure cookers. A lot of induction is happening these days. Okay, so what is induct? Induce, to put something in, to take something in. If you say somebody has been induced, put in an induced coma, what are you saying? You're saying that originally the chap wasn't in a coma. But if he's had bad head injuries, to prevent further damage, people send them into an induced coma to give them a greater chance of recovery. Okay, so that is induce, induct. You have these induction ceremonies these days. What are you trying to do in those induction ceremonies? What we are trying to do in those induction ceremonies is bring a new lot of students, bring them face to face with the others who have already been there, let them know their teachers, so that the seniors can tell them, this fellow, don't ever listen to this class. God knows what he says. Okay? And then you'll say, this lady you should go to. She teaches wonderfully. It's nice and easy. So that is induction. You're not just inducting a person, you're inducting an idea of a person into a person. So that is induction. So the logic that you follow, is now no longer deductive. It's no longer deductive, it is now inductive. Okay, so if we are looking at this kind of deductive and inductive logic, what we can see is that till that particular time, mathematical deductions used to be the ones that set the scope for knowledge. But now with John Locke, deductions have been thrown out. And you're saying it is through induction. It is through your coming into contact with various things that constitute the world. That is how you're gaining knowledge. Okay? So that is basically what you find in induction. And this particular form of inductive thinking and this particular idea that it is through inductive thinking that we can actually get knowledge now begins to gain currency, and slowly the idea that we are born with knowledge in our head is being pushed back. It's not completely pushed back. Please remember that. I'm only talking now about the Anglophone world. Okay? But in other parts of the world, there are still different kinds of things. Okay, but the majority, and we are living in an Anglophone world, we go to Anglo universities. Okay, and all of us want to go to the USA, which is again an Anglophone country. Okay, so let's now confine ourselves only to this particular bit of thing called inductive knowledge. Inductive knowledge, you must understand, is a British delicacy cooked and served by John Locke. Okay. Tomorrow I'll meet you. I'm not able to sit anymore. Tomorrow we will pick up the whole idea of inductivism and empiricism, how they are interconnected, how without inductivism you cannot have empiricism. Okay? So please understand that we are doing this as a tip of the iceberg. The iceberg is really big and deep. So thank you very much for coming. And tomorrow we'll have this rest of the thing on. It's not going to go over in one class. It'll probably take 2 classes, 3 classes. But we need to know induction properly, because unless and until we know induction properly, inductive reasoning properly, we are likely to face a number of confusions. When people ask us questions which are contrary to the logic of induction. Okay, so thank you very much. I'll see you tomorrow. I'm sorry I'm ending early today, but I won't be able to sit anymore. And so, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.